The first and one of the most important dimensions of business analytics is how well you can explore the data that is provided and what all you can discover from the data. At a very outset, to what extent you can dig through the data, exploring the data. Probably that is where I say single most important step in any data analysis exercise. To what extent I understand the data, to what extent I get familiar with the data, and what are the different tools that I use to explore for the various patterns in the data and anomalies in the data. Because without doing that, any kind of a solution that I suggest, any kind of a pattern that I suggest, any kind of a model that I suggest will make it null and void itself. Because I should not just look at the data and make a model. There are a lot of things that I may have to work on the data, clean the data, make it fit for use. So that if I'm not doing any step that I'm doing after that is a sheer waste of time. We have to understand that I should not make a business decision using a very complex methods and models unless I am really convinced, unless I am quite doubly sure that this is the model that is required for this kind of a data, because this data capture, this model is really fit for this kind of a data. So understanding the data becomes the most important thing before thinking of fitting any kind of model to it. So our data typically knows much more than what we do about the real process. For example, I try to fit some linear regression model. I know what is regression. So based on that, I try to create a model based on the data. I take some data and create some linear regression on the top of it. Okay. Some output may come out of that regression. But the simple driving force is if the patterns of the data are non-linear, are probably a quadratic, how can I apply a linear model to it? Now, when do I know that the pattern is quadratic? Unless I really dig into the data, try to explore the pattern in the data, I cannot understand that this data is quadratic in nature and it is not linear, and hence I cannot apply a linear model for it. So we have to be very, very convinced that the first step has to be much, much effective before we try to use our state of the art tools, methods, techniques to really derive conclusions from our data. Right? So this exploration will really help us, one, to detect the trends and patterns in the data, along with any kind of anomalies and outliers that are present in the data can quite comfortably be explored out of them. So we will use a few numerical exploration procedures like summary statistics, right? This is one powerful tool which helps us in exploring the data quite comfortably, or probably something to do with correlation. So these are some of the ones that can help us in exploring the data quite in a numerical way. And when I talk about the visual data exploration, we talk about the different kinds of graphs. We use box plot, we use scatter plots, we use histograms. There are again quite a good number of graphs which can really help us in terms of exploring the basic pattern in the data, the basic anomalies in the data. So I use these two kinds of tools simultaneously, wherein I can take the help of one with the information of the other. So we will talk about a few of these things. We'll talk about what are the different tools that are available for us to summarize the data. Then transforming the data, we'll look at time series graphs, spatial graphs, categorical responses if they are there, like yes, no kind of responses, are not a numerical kind of responses, but more categories kind of responses, and panel data if I have. So we'll talk about each of these things as we move further, but different kinds of data exploration methods and tools which we can traditionally look at. And once we have done this entire exercise by working out with all these different kinds of tools and methods, our data is actually ready for either making some kind of conclusions or doing some kind of predictions, creating models, all that kind of stuff. But the basic step lies in terms of data exploration and how adequately I can explore the data to identify the trends, patterns, anomalies, and outliers in my data. Right? So every data that we are presented, this step has to be initiated before we really go further into the complex models creation and conclusion making activity. Right?